first class for you. Back off now. Stop wasting my gate and move your ass before I shut this door in your face.
Cold morning light floods the glass concourse. A black CEO in a red suit lifts her phone as a flight attendant blocks the jet bridge and raises her voice. The security officer watches, jaw tight, hand near the radio. The scanner chirps denial and the crowd hushes. She breathes once, steady, then presses a contact labeled executive line. A calm voice answers. The gate falls silent. Procedures pause. Faces turn. She says, "I respect rules, enforce them fairly, fix this now." One call, and the airline holds its breath. Morning light spreads across the glass concourse and turns the floor into a pale river. The black CEO in a tailored red suit walks toward the jet bridge with steady steps, phone in one hand, boarding pass in the other. The air smells of coffee and sanitizer. A flight attendant steps into her path, palm raised in a polite wall, voice tight though the smile tries to hold. The scanner at the podium gives a short refusal chirp, the red glow pooling across the plastic like a stop sign. Conversations nearby taper to a hush, wheels squeak, a child coughs. Then even that sound fades. The black CEO keeps her shoulders low and her gaze level. She breathes in through her nose, sets the strap of her bag higher, and asks for the policy that just turned an approval into a denial. The flight attendant quotes the procedure in a careful tone that wobbles at the edges, eyes sliding toward the line of passengers and back again. A security officer stands a few steps away, jaw firm, fingers touching the radio at his vest, not yet pressing the talk button. The concourse hum thins to a faint electric murmur. The boarding sign for first class glows like a promise held at arm's length. She does not raise her voice. She names her seat, her confirmation, the boarding time stamped on the screen when she checked in. She asks for a supervisor. The request stalls. The flight attendant repeats that boarding cannot proceed. The black CEO nods once as if finishing a silent calculation. She opens her contacts and taps a number labeled executive line. The sound of the ring is soft, but it cuts through the room like a narrow beam. The officer shifts his stance. The attendant's smile tightens. A manager looks up from a nearby terminal, sensing a change in air pressure that is not about weather. The call connects. Her tone is even. She states the gate, the flight, the events as they occurred, with the precision of a memo read aloud. No adjectives, only facts. She says that the denial contradicts the record in the system and that this moment is now a matter of compliance and brand risk. On the other end, a calm voice asks two questions and then tells her to hold for a brief moment. The second stretch, not as a stall, but as an instruction for the room to listen. The public address speaker clicks, fails to speak, and settles into a quiet hum. The boarding door remains closed. The red scanner light keeps still. The manager arrives at the podium with a tablet in hand, nods to the officer, and reviews the record. The black CEO does not move. Her phone stays by her ear. Her eyes do not leave the attendant. The manager reads the ticketed class, the payment status, the priority code, the confirmation of identity, the timestamp, the seat assignment. Each line lands like a soft gavel. The attendant's arm lowers a fraction. Breath returns to the crowd in thin threads. The voice on the phone returns and asks to be placed on speaker for a short statement. The manager sets the device on the podium, and the voice instructs the gate to pause all boarding at this terminal until compliance verifies alignment with policy. No blame is assigned out loud. The instruction is specific, narrow, and immediate. Silence grows into a presence. The black CEO thanks the voice, then lowers the phone. She keeps her posture composed, neither triumphant nor small. She repeats her first request in the same tone as before. Read the policy aloud. The manager does so. The words confirm what the system already showed. The path begins to open, not because she demanded it, but because the process finally caught up with the facts. Faces turn. Some look relieved. Some look wary. The officer gives a slight nod as if to say, the room can breathe again. She steps forward by a single pace and stops, allowing the procedure to complete its final checks. Part 1 ends without a cheer or a scene. It ends with order restored and a door that will soon swing on its hinge. The scene rewinds to the check-in area 30 minutes earlier, the hall warm with the smell of coffee and the soft scrape of luggage wheels. The black CEO stands at the counter with her passport open and her confirmation pulled up on her phone. The screen shows her name, first class, seat assignment, and the priority tag that follows her loyalty number. A clerk scans the code, the monitor flashes green, then settles into a calm blue band with the words, "Cleared to board." He prints the tag for her carry-on and places it on the handle with a practiced motion. She thanks him, folds the document, and steps aside to reorganize the zipper on her bag. There is nothing remarkable about this moment. It is the kind of moment a traveler barely remembers. A second clerk passes behind the counter and glances at her file as if glancing at a weather report. His expression does not change. He taps into the record, confirms the payment status, and adds a note that the traveler prefers a quiet seat and declines pre-boarding assistance. She appreciates the courtesy and moves on. The escalator hums. Overhead, a departure board scrolls on time in a reassuring rhythm. She checks the time and walks towards security with an easy pace. At the screening line, the officer checks the boarding pass and nods her through the priority lane. Her bag goes into the tray, the belt rolls, she steps through the arch, hears the soft tone that means all is well, and collects her things. A nearby family argues about a stroller, a couple studies, a gate map. Life goes on in its ordinary way. She glances at the gate number and starts toward it. Halfway there, a message arrives from a colleague about a contract that needs a signature before noon. She pauses near a window and signs it from her phone with a short note. The glass throws back her reflection and a bright stripe of sky. A plane pushes back from a nearby gate. Ground crew raise their hands, all motion precise and useful. She pockets the phone and continues on, unaware that the mood at her destination will be different from this calm. The memory stops and the present resumes. She stands again at the jet bridge entrance, the space colder and more brittle than the areas she just moved through. Her proof of proper check-in lives on the devices around her. It is written in the code the clerks touched and the quiet approvals she passed. Yet the gate has become a bottleneck, not because of data, but because of how a person at the door chose to read it. The contrast is sharp and it steadies her. She speaks to the manager who has finally arrived, not with heat, but with a cadence that leaves no gaps. At check-in, cleared. At security, cleared. Payment verified, identity matched, seat assigned. If there's a new issue, identify it and show it. The manager runs a search and sees the same trail. The system records are clean, the timeline is straightforward, the facts do not wobble. The flight attendant who blocked the way earlier keeps her eyes on the tablet. She looks smaller now, not in height, but in certainty. She glances at the security officer who remains where he was, hand near the radio, present but not intrusive. The line of passengers watches without commentary. The sound of the terminal is small again. A suitcase roll, a cough, a distant announcement from another gate. Nothing else. The voice on the phone returns and asks to confirm the exact moments of each clearance. The manager answers with time. The voice asks for the policy citation that would allow a denial in this scenario. The pause that follows is not long, but it is heavy. The manager reads, "The text does not support what just happened. The correction begins, not with apology first, but with process." The gate is placed on a short hold while the records update to reflect what was always true. She hears the shift in tone before she hears any formal words. The red light of the scanner dims. The tablet shows a green bar for boarding. The manager says they will invite her to board once the hold is lifted. She nods. The rewind has done its work. It made the quiet earlier steps visible. It replaced speculation with sequence. It turned a hallway argument into a ledger of facts. And now, the ledger speaks louder than the room. The hold ripples outward from the podium like a tide that moves without sound. The public address speaker gives a soft click and then nothing, as if the ceiling itself has decided to listen. The departure board pauses on an update and the rolling letters settle into a still row of blue. The security officer shifts his weight and lets his hand fall away from the radio. He is still watching, but the set of his shoulders says the emergency has become an audit. The manager keeps one palm flat on the tablet while the other fingers move through menus with calm precision. The flight attendant stands half a step back, eyes steady on the screen, breathing measured, posture no longer squared to block the way, but also not yet turned to invite passage. In her ear, the black CEO hears the quiet timbre of the corporate voice returning. The line asks for a clear narrative in present tense. She provides it in a single stream where each event lands in the order it happened. Check in, security cleared, gate denial without policy citation. The voice acknowledges and asks to remain connected. Somewhere beyond the glass, an operations room begins to stitch together a record. Legal notes the policy clause. Customer care drafts the language for corrective communication. The people in those rooms have never seen this gate, yet the gate now unspools across their screens. The process is not dramatic. Be careful. A passenger at the back of the line lowers his phone, deciding to watch rather than film. A woman near the aisle seat presses her lips and looks at the scanner as if willing it to change color by respect alone. The officer steps along the rope, stanchions, and speaks softly so the line can hear. Boarding is briefly paused for a policy verification. Thank you for your patience. The words are simple and they take the strain out of the air the way a deep breath can change a heartbeat. The manager calls the station supervisor. The conversation is clipped and professional. The supervisor asks for the exact clause in the manual that covers boarding refusal for confirmed first class when identity and payment are verified. The manager scrolls, the clause appears, the clause does not support the denial. The supervisor says to keep the hold, update the case file, and place the corporate line on speaker for the next step. The phone goes on the podium, angled so the microphone is not blocked. The attendant glances up with an expression that says this has moved beyond her rank and that the only thing left for her to do in this minute is follow what is read aloud. The voice from the phone fills the small space around the gate without raising volume. It thanks the passengers for their patience. It states that policy requires equal enforcement and that any discrepancy will be corrected on the spot. It instructs the team to review the record for the traveler, confirm eligibility, and proceed according to the written standard. No names are used, no blame is assigned. The tone is steady enough to lower the room by a few degrees. The black CEO keeps her tone in the same lane. She does not add rhetoric. She stands with her phone at her side and watches the tablet that decides who moves and who does not. The manager opens the passenger profile and reads the markers that matter. Verified loyalty status, verified payment, assigned seat, no flags, the attendant listens, jaw small now, not clenched, just aware. She is not a villain in this telling. She is a link in a chain that needs to be checked. Accountability here does not require humiliation. It requires accuracy and the will to correct the course in public. The board above the gate wakes and adjusts a line of text to indicate a brief pause for review. The officer notices how the passengers respond to that word choice. Review feels calm. He makes a mental note. The manager taps approval on the screen and the scanner light shifts from red to a steady white, then to the accepting green. That means the door is a door again. The act is small. The effect is large only because everyone can see it. The corporate voice asks for a final step before the hold is lifted. Read aloud the relevant policy so that the room understands what was expected all along. The manager does so. The sentences are dry, almost boring, in a way that helps. They speak of procedure and sequence and identity checks and the principle that purchase and confirmation and status lead to boarding unless a specific risk exists. No such risk is present. The room does not cheer. It exhales. The black CEO nods once in thanks to the voice and to the manager. She speaks so everyone can hear, but with a pace that does not make anyone feel scolded. I expect fairness, not favor. Today we correct this, and tomorrow you can use this moment to train for the next one. Her eyes meet the attendant's eyes without heat. The attendant swallows and says she understands. The words are quiet, but they land. The hold is lifted. The officer returns to his neutral post. The manager invites the passenger to board when ready. The black CEO waits half a beat and then gestures to the person behind her to proceed first, not as a performance, but as a way to return the flow to ordinary time. The line begins to move again, soft wheel sounds, gentle thank yous, a cleaner rhythm. The call remains open for a final note from the corporate. Compliance will record the incident. The gate team will receive a short debrief. The company appreciates everyone's patience, the phone clicks off, the scanner stands ready. The moment that it swelled to fill, the terminal shrinks to the shape of a doorway. The station supervisor arrives at a brisk walk, tablet under one arm, headset mic clipped at the jaw. He surveys the scene in a single sweep that takes in the podium, the boarding door, the security officer, the paused line, and the black CEO standing with her phone lowered but still unlocked. He introduces himself without fuss and asks the manager to summarize the record. The summary is spare. Confirmed first class. Identity verified. No flags. Boarding denied without a policy basis. He nods once and asks to join the corporate line that has been guiding the hold. The phone goes back on speaker. His first sentence is the kind that rebuilds ground. We will get this right and we will do it in the open. He requests the event log from check-in to now and watches entries populate on his screen. Timestamp, terminal, agent code, action taken. He does not hunt for a culprit. He hunts for sequence and variance. He asks the attendant to step forward and describe, in her own words, what she believed policy required. She speaks in a quiet voice that carries. She says she thought an alert she saw on another flight applied here. She admits she did not recheck when the scanner hesitated. The supervisor thanks her for answering directly. He does not allow the room to turn into a spectacle. He anchors attention in the method. We correct the rulebook first, and then we talk about how to teach it so you do not have to guess. The corporate voice returns, now joined by a compliance officer who has the cool cadence of someone who writes manuals. The compliance officer reads the clause that governs boarding decisions and notes where misreadings tend to occur. He explains the difference between a true risk flag and a generic prompt to review a profile. He asks the team to add a small on-screen note that spells out the difference in plain language so that a busy gate never confuses the two. The supervisor assigns a tech to file that request before the end of the hour. The decision is not a punishment. It is an edit to reduce friction and ambiguity. The black CEO remains where she is, not asking for credit, not retreating from the center she has been forced to occupy. The supervisor turns to her and says that the company recognizes the cost of the delay, the loss of dignity that accompanies being stopped without cause, and the risk that moments like this create beyond one gate. He says they will make the apology formal and written, and they will make the fix measurable. He asks if she wishes to proceed to board now or wait while the team completes the read-aloud acknowledgement. She says she will wait. The correction matters as much as the timing of the wheels up. He asks the manager to read the policy once more, this time pairing each line with the specific fact that matches it. Purchase confirmed, payment validated, identity matched, eligibility clear. The reading is almost liturgical in its even pace. Passengers bear witness without noise. The security officer shifts to one side so the camera on the podium can see the screen without obstruction. The tableau has the feel of a public classroom that nobody meant to set up, and yet everyone understands why it needed to appear. The supervisor directs a brief training huddle at the edge of the gate, speaking in low tones that carry enough for the front row to hear, but not enough to turn the concourse into a theater. He outlines a three-step check that must precede any refusal. Verify the system record, cite the clause by number, confirm with a second set of eyes if there is uncertainty. He makes it clear that a pause for clarity is always better than a quick denial. The attendant listens and nods, not a performance nod, but the kind that signals a new mental route has been carved. The corporate voice asks for a final statement to close the intervention. The supervisor speaks it into the phone and into the room. The traveler is cleared. The gate team will implement an immediate refresher. The company thanks passengers for their patience and apologizes to the traveler for the error. There is no applause. There is relief, and there is a sense that the floor has leveled out after a tilt nobody chose. The manager turns the scanner to face forward. The light is a plain green. The color looks different now because of what it signals, not because of any change in the bulb. The black CEO thanks the supervisor and the manager and the officer with the same measured tone she began with. She does not linger on the exchange. She gathers her bag strap and steps forward when invited. Before she crosses the threshold, she pauses. Not to deliver a line, but to set a model. She asks the attendant if she can add one note. When a traveler asks for the policy, that is a cue to call the play by the book, not an attack. The attendant says she understands and that she will do it that way next time. The acknowledgement is small and it is the point. When she finally passes the reader and the door unlocks, the action feels both ordinary and hard-won. The officer returns to easy watchfulness. The passengers find their voices again, softened by the shared lesson. The supervisor sends a short message up the chain with the words "incident closed" and follow-up scheduled. The call ends. The training reminder pops onto the team calendar. A process that began as a wall becomes a corridor. What remains is not a story about triumph or defeat. It is a record of how a system can be asked to live up to its own rules, and how people can choose to make that request the way a pilot corrects a drift: steady hands on the yoke, eyes on the horizon. The aisle narrows to quiet as she steps through the jet bridge and into the cabin. The light shifts from the blue tint of the concourse to a softer glow that makes every surface look calm. A flight attendant at the door gives a measured welcome and means it. The manager has already spoken to the crew. The seat map on the galley screen shows her name in the first row. The attendant gestures toward it and asks if she would like water while the last check's complete. She says yes, thank you, and moves forward with an even stride that tells the room the storm is past and the air is safe again. At her seat, she sets the phone face down and smooths the strap of her bag across her lap. The window holds a slice of morning sky. A ground vehicle passes in a slow arc and leaves a clean trail of motion. Across the aisle, a passenger who watched the scene from the line catches her eye and offers a small nod that is not pity and not applause, only respect. She returns it with a slight smile. The cabin takes that cue and settles. The gate manager appears at the threshold of the cabin with the supervisor just behind. They do not cross into the row. They keep a respectful distance and speak softly. They confirm that boarding will resume in a moment, that the record has been corrected, and that a written apology will arrive before the plane lifts off. She thanks them for handling the correction in view of the room and not behind a closed office door. The supervisor says, "That is how trust grows again." He adds that a brief coaching note and a policy highlight will go to all gate teams before midday, not to single anyone out, but to make sure the language of the rule is as plain as the light over the aisle now. Her phone buzzes with a new message. Corporate compliance sends a short note that contains 3 sentences and no flourish. It acknowledges the error, names the clause that governs the decision, and states the action items that will follow at the station. There is no attempt to soften with warm adjectives. It is specific, and that is what matters to her. She replies with a line that thanks them for the clarity and asks that the training emphasize how to handle a request to read policy aloud. She adds that a traveler who asks for the rule is not a problem to move aside, but a signal to anchor everyone, in fact. The reply comes back with a simple agreement and a promise to add that sentence to the guideline. The door chime sounds from the front galley. Boarding resumes with a smoother cadence than before. A child in economy claps at the sound without knowing why. It helps. Wheels click into place. Coats go into overhead bins. The security officer outside the door swaps a quiet word with the manager and then turns down the volume on his radio. The station breathes. The departure board in the hall rolls forward 1 line. The concourse becomes a river again and not a dam. In her seat, she opens a notepad and writes a few lines for herself. Not revenge, remedy. Respect the people who fix it in view. Set a record that others can hold. She has led teams long enough to know that public embarrassment teaches the wrong lessons. Precision teaches the right ones. She closes the notepad and looks out at the wing. Sunlight catches the edge and throws a thin blade of brightness across the tarmac. It looks like a signature drawn with light. The flight attendant from the gate steps into the cabin with careful posture and stops at the aisle near her row. Her voice is low and even. She apologizes for the interruption earlier and thanks the traveler for asking for the rule rather than trading heat for heat. The words carry a sincerity that cannot be faked. The black CEO answers in the same tone. She says the best apology is the fix that follows it. She adds that she hopes the attendant will lead the next training huddle. The attendant nods and says she will volunteer. The captain makes a brief announcement that mentions weather and taxi times and nothing at all about the gate. It is exactly right. The seatbelt sign chimes. The aircraft begins to push. The cabin leans by a fraction and then steadies. She rests her head against the cushion and lets her shoulders drop the last half-inch to the seat back. She does not replay the scene. She does not script what she wishes she had said. She has already said all that needed to be said. She has already turned a denial into a procedural correction that will outlast this flight. A final message arrives before takeoff. It is from the station supervisor. It confirms that the incident report has been filed, that a coaching session is scheduled, and that a note titled "Equal Enforcement at the Gate" will go out by lunchtime across the region. He thanks her for choosing to escalate with calm and for holding the company to its own language. She reads it once and then sets the phone to airplane mode. The engine tone rises. The runway lines rush toward a single point. The plane lifts into clean air. In the first quiet after climb out, she closes her eyes and lets the future move forward without friction. Taxi begins with a soft shudder, and the cabin leans almost imperceptibly. The executive buckles in and lets the belt settle flat against her jacket. She watches the wing flex as the aircraft turns. She is not replaying the scene. She is mapping it. Facts first, then the route from failure to remedy. Outside the window, a service truck drifts past, and the driver lifts a hand in an automatic wave to the ground crew. The gesture is small and ordinary. It calms the heart more than any speech. Her phone is in airplane mode, but the Notes app works without a network. She creates a page titled "Gate Incident" and begins to outline what matters for a follow-up. Timestamps. Names are not needed. Policy citation. System state at check-in. System state at the gate. Verbal denial without clause. Escalation channel used. Corporate response on speaker. Public read back. Boarding restored. She adds one more line that feels like the hinge of it all. When a traveler asks to hear the rule, treat that as a stabilizing cue, not a challenge. The flight attendant assigned to the row kneels level with the armrest and offers water again. Her voice is steady. She asks if the passenger would like a brief moment to speak later about service on board. The executive thanks her and says later will be fine. The exchange is practical, not symbolic. The cabin is settling into its rituals. Safety card out, safety card back. Overhead bins locked with a flat click. There is mercy in these patterns. The captain announces a short taxi delay due to spacing on the runway. The tone is neutral and professional. The aircraft pauses near a crossroads of painted lines. A jet lifts off in the middle distance and slides into the low blue. The executive takes that moment to refine the follow-up note. She writes 3 lines for leadership. Public correction earns trust. Training must drill the difference between risk flags and review prompts. Gate teams need a one-touch path to a second set of eyes when uncertain. She adds 3 lines for herself. Do not escalate to punish. Escalate to teach. Keep records clear. Leave space for people to repair what they broke. Across the aisle, the passenger who nodded earlier opens a laptop and then closes it without typing. He stares ahead and seems to be measuring the pace of his own breath. It occurs to her that incidents leave rings that others feel. Not every witness speaks. Not every witness forgets. She considers the hidden audience in airports and how policy applied with care can keep a crowd from curdling into sides. The aircraft begins to roll again. The runway number comes into view in large white paint. The engines rise in tone and the air in the cabin grows dense. She places the phone face down and rests her palms on her knees to mirror the stillness she wants. During the sprint, she lets the world be noisy. The wheels lift. Weight drops from the seat. City grids tilt and recede. Clouds take the window like a clean page. 10 minutes after climbing, the bell sounds and the attendants move with the calm of people who know the playbook. The one from the door returns with a small card. It is a courtesy note. It confirms that the incident report is filed and that a written apology will be sent by the time they land. It includes a direct contact in case anything about the record needs correction. The card is spare and useful. She tucks it into the notepad so it will not drift away in the shuffle of a long day. She sketches a small triangle on the notes page and labels the corners with 3 words. Dignity, clarity, speed. It is her shorthand for crisis work. Protect the person in front of you. State the rule in plain terms. Act quickly enough that the fix arrives before resentment hardens. She underlines clarity once. Too many things look like character when they are only training. Too many errors look personal when they are structural. She writes 1 more sentence before closing the app. Fix the interface so the next agent cannot mistake a review reminder for a denial flag. Clouds thin and the sky opens. A tray slides onto the armrest with a glass and a napkin folded square. The attendant thanks her again for her patience at the gate. The executive lifts the water and answers without ceremony. Thank you for fixing it where everyone could see. Thank you for reading the rule. Thank you for letting the facts speak. The words are plain. They land without drama, and that is the point. The cabin resumes its quiet choreography. The worst part of the morning is now a paragraph with a date and a path forward. Cruise altitude brings a steady hush that sounds like distance turned into air. The seatbelt sign clicks off and a few passengers stand to stretch. The cabin returns to its normal rhythm. The executive opens her notepad again and adds a line about witness care. People saw the denial and the repair. They will carry a story out of this plane. Help them carry the right one. She writes a short message to her comms lead that will send after landing. Keep the frame on, process and fairness. No victory lap, no villain script. Show the fix and the steps that prevent a repeat. Across the aisle, a flight attendant checks her side galley and then approaches with a fresh pot of coffee. She asks if the traveler prefers water or tea. The executive chooses tea and adds a thank you with a small smile. The attendant nods, steady now, and leaves to prepare the cup. The executive watches her walk and thinks about how training settles into the body. It becomes posture. It becomes the angle of a hand offering a tray. It becomes a voice that holds steady when the room leans. Her screen fills with offline drafts. One is a note to her company. She does not retell the scene in vivid color. She keeps it to a page. She writes that she was denied boarding for a ticket that met every requirement, that she made a single call, that the airline corrected in public and set a training step to prevent a similar error. She writes what matters for her own team. Calm escalation works. Facts are the spine. Dignity is non-negotiable. She adds a closing thought for managers. When policy is clear, people can be brave and kind at the same time. The tea arrives in a white cup with a thin curl of steam. The attendant sets it down and lingers a moment. She says she will attend the next training and that she asked to shadow the manager at the gate next week. The executive says that is a good way to turn a rough morning into a better month. Her tone is even, the row feels steady. A passenger 2 rows back leans forward and speaks in a low voice. He says he saw the exchange and appreciated the way she asked for the policy out loud. He says it helped the rest of the line understand what was at stake without turning the gate into a stage. She thanks him and returns to her notes. She writes 3 small sentences for herself. Ask for the rule with respect, keep the timeline clean, leave a model others can reuse. Far below, clouds make slow continents that drift and reform. She thinks about interfaces and how a single color on a scanner carries too much meaning. Red should not equal refusal without a second check. A short label could change behavior in 10 airports by noon. She sketches a few words that might sit under the light. Review prompt. Verify and continue. She will send the idea later to the airline contact, not as a demand. As a suggestion, any busy team would welcome. The cabin crew begins first service and the aisle fills with a soft rattle of carts. The executive closes her eyes for a moment and breathes slowly. She follows the count she uses before important calls. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. It clears the static the way a screen clears when a frozen app finally releases. She opens her eyes and writes one last note. Public correction restores trust faster than a private apology. Make that a rule for our own support teams as well. The captain speaks again to report smooth air ahead and an early arrival if winds hold. There is no allusion to the gate. The best line today is the quiet one that keeps the aircraft a place of calm. She looks at the wing and watches a small shimmer at the tip where air peels away into a faint thread. It reminds her of a pen lifting at the end of a signature. She slides the notepad back into her bag and folds the napkin into a neat square. She places the empty cup on it and lets her shoulders drop into the seat by a fraction. The sequence from denial to remedy has been written. The rest will follow through. Training sent, policy clarified, interface improved. She does not need the story to go viral for it to matter. She needs the next traveler to pass the gate without friction and without having to know any of the work behind the curtain. That will be the true measure. The plane hums on and the morning becomes brighter at the edges. Ground teams move while the aircraft holds steady against the sky. In an operations room across the field, a compliance officer opens a fresh case file and writes a simple header. Gate denial reversed after verification. He fills the record with timestamps and the exact policy lines that were read aloud at the podium. A product manager joins the thread and attaches a ticket for a small interface change on the scanner screen. The note is short and practical. Add a label beneath the red state that says review required. Do not refuse without a second check. Add a help icon that opens to the clause number. The manager assigns it to the afternoon build and sets a reminder for a quick test at the station before the evening bank of departures. At the station, the supervisor walks back to a spare desk and drafts a recap for the team. He keeps the tone calm and the sentence is spare. A traveler with a confirmed first-class ticket was denied at the gate without a supporting policy. The team paused boarding, read the rule, and corrected the record in public. He lists the 3-step check that now sits at the top of every boarding decision. Verify the system record. Cite the clause. Call for a second set of eyes if uncertain. He adds one more line that he wants people to remember by heart. If a traveler asks to hear the rule, treat that as a stabilizing cue. The flight attendant who had blocked the way sits in the break room with a tablet and opens the manual. She searches for the term that confused her. The page explains the difference between a risk flag and a profile review prompt. The distinction looks obvious on a quiet screen and slippery when the line is long and the room is loud. She writes a small card for herself to carry at shift change. Read does not always mean stop. Read, verify, confirm. Passenger Relations begins to draft a note that will reach the woman in seat 2A before landing. The team avoids warm words that do not hold up under strain. They choose precision. The note acknowledges the error, names the policy, states the fix, and gives a direct line for follow-up. A second note goes out to regional gate managers with a request to briefly review the clause in the next huddle. The message asks them to practice reading the policy out loud. Saying words in a room changes how people remember them. On the plane, the executive opens her laptop offline and sketches a one-page framework she uses when she teaches leaders how to correct in public. Begin with facts that can be checked. Keep posture low and voice steady. Give the other side a way to join the fix without losing face. Close with a step that others can copy. She writes a section titled Mistakes That Scale and lists 2 items. Unclear interface, language and training that has not been stress tested on a busy floor. She adds a short suggestion to send back to the airline contact. Run drills in live conditions with noise. Practice the pause that buys clarity. The security officer at the gate finalizes his short report. He keeps it to sequence and observation. He notes the moment intensity dropped when the manager stated that the team would read the policy and correct in view. He writes that passengers responded well to the word review on the board and that the phrasing may be useful at other stations. His supervisor flags the line and forwards it to the team that writes scripts for public address. A small ripple runs through social media when a traveler posts a calm thread that describes the denial and the public correction without names, photos, or heat. The tone is factual and respectful. The thread draws more praise for the fix than outrage for the mistake. The airline comms team sees it and decides the right move is to amplify the principle rather than the post. They prepare a short message that says policy must be enforced fairly and that teams will always pause to read the rule when there is doubt. They hold the tweet until leadership signs. Back in the cabin, the executive closes her notes and watches the light shift across the wing. The flight has settled into that middle stretch when time loses its edges. She thinks about what will last after the landing. The apology will be filed and forgotten. The interface label will persist. The 3-step check will become muscle memory if leaders keep it alive in the first weeks. Her role in that work is small. She asked for the rule and stayed long enough to see it applied. She escalated without a flare. She left a record that helps the next person move through a gate without friction. The plane hums forward and the ground team keeps drawing lines that turn a tense morning into future routine. Descent begins with a subtle drop in engine tone and a slow slide of cloud to gray. The seatbelt sign returns and the cabin leans toward arrival. The executive closes her eyes for a breath and then opens the notes she prepared. She adds a short header so the record is complete. Correction achieved at gate. Policy read aloud. Hold lifted. Training action set. She writes one more line because she knows memory fades when the day grows busy. The calm voice of the speaker made the room believe the rule, not the rumor. On the ground, the station supervisor's message reaches regional leadership. It includes the 3-step check and a brief clip from the podium cam that shows the moment the manager read the clause. In the clip, the scanner light softens from red to green while the line stands quiet. A training lead pauses the video at that frame and drafts a micro lesson. When policy becomes visible, tension drains without anyone losing face. The lesson will roll out in short sessions that fit between departures. It requires no new software and no budget meeting. It requires attention and 20 minutes of practice each shift. In the operations room, the product manager pushes the small interface change through review. The help icon now opens to the exact clause and a plain language summary that uses 2 sentences instead of a paragraph. The red state shows review required with a short line that says, "Call a second set of eyes." The manager pings the station to test it after lunch on a quiet flight. If it works, the label will spread across terminals within the week. The compliance officer records the change request in the case file, so the fix lives in the same folder as the mistake. The airline comms team receives a green light to post a statement that focuses on process. The message is spare. It says policy is enforced equally, and teams will pause to read the rule when there is doubt. It avoids names and drama. It makes a promise that can be measured. A follow-up note goes to gate leaders with 2 phrases to try on the public address system. Brief review for policy confirmation and thank you for your patience. The words are small tools to lower a room without sounding vague. In her seat, the executive writes a short letter to herself for the next time a system stumbles. Open with facts the team can check. Name the rule without heat. Invite the fix into the open so that trust has room to stand. She thinks about witnesses again and adds a line about quiet bystanders who carry the tone of a place even when they never speak. She wants them to leave with a model they can mirror in their own jobs. She closes the note and sets the phone in the seat pocket. The approach grows clearer. The city grid appears in thin lines and the wing drops a few degrees toward the runway. The crew moves through the aisle, eyes scanning gently, hands on seat tops for balance. The attendant from the door glances at the executive with a steady expression that says, "The cabin is ready and the morning has been turned into procedure." The executive nods once. She does not need more words. At the station, a quick huddle forms near a whiteboard with a rough map of the concourse. The supervisor sketches 3 boxes and writes the verifier: record, sight clause, second eyes. He assigns a senior agent to shadow 2 new hires for the rest of the week and listen for the point where habit might slip into hurry. He reminds the team that a pause for clarity is not a delay to fear. It is the cheapest and fastest way to get a decision right. Someone suggests a laminated card that clips to the scanner with the steps in bold. The idea takes 5 minutes to approve and will exist by the afternoon. Back in the air, the tires meet the runway with a clean rush and a short bounce. Reverse thrust hums and fades. The aircraft turns toward the gate. The executive feels the familiar roll of arrival settle into her body. She thinks about how much attention it takes to keep a culture honest at the edges where customers meet rules. She decides to send one more message after the wheels stop. Thank the supervisor for making the correction visible. Offer a quick call to share the triangle she drew in the notes. Dignity, clarity, speed. 3 points that keep a morning from turning into a headline for the wrong reasons. The plane slides to a stop. The chime sounds. A line forms that looks like any other line on any other day. That is the quiet victory. A tense moment has been folded into a routine, not by hiding it, but by writing it down where everyone could see and then teaching it until it felt ordinary. The door opens and the world returns with its usual noise. Taxi to the gate feels slower than the long miles in the sky. The aircraft turns, straightens, and the chime releases the cabin to its gentle rustle. The executive waits in her seat while the front rows stand and reach for bags. She prefers to let the aisle clear and to give the crew room to work. The attendant from earlier steps to the doorway and thanks passengers with a voice that has found its center again. The manager from the gate appears briefly in the galley, gives a small nod toward the first row, and then withdraws to avoid turning the aisle into a stage. When her turn comes, the executive rises, smooths her jacket, and lifts her bag without hurry. The cabin smells of coffee and warm air from the vents. She thanks the crew on her way out. At the threshold, she meets the eyes of the cabin lead, who says the team appreciates the way she asked for the rule. The executive answers that the rule works best when it is read out loud where people can hear it. Then she steps into the jet bridge, where the cooler air carries the quiet of concrete and distance. Inside the terminal, a message from the station supervisor appears as soon as the phone reconnects. It confirms that the incident file includes the policy citation, the steps for correction, and the scheduled refresher for gate staff. It also notes that the product has pushed a label change to the scanner for a live test later in the day. The executive replies with thanks and the short triangle she wrote in the air: dignity, clarity, speed. She adds that she is available for a brief call with the training lead if it would help. The answer comes back quickly with a yes and a time that fits between flights. She walks past the windows and pauses at a view of ground crews guiding a new arrival. Movements are practiced and spare, like a language that uses only the words it needs. She thinks again about how systems learn. People change faster when the change is small, visible, and immediately useful. She opens a new note titled Small Levers and writes 3 lines. Labels that speak plain language, short scripts that fit into real time, leaders who demonstrate the pause instead of just preaching it. Her own team needs an update as well. She drafts a brief internal memo while waiting near the car service stand. She does not tell a story in color. She lists the sequence and the fix. She reminds managers that escalation is a tool for teaching, not a weapon for scoring points. She asks her leaders to audit their own customer touchpoints and find places where a review prompt might be mistaken for a hard stop. She sends the memo to her chief of staff with a note to share at the next stand-up and to log the incident as a case study for leadership training. The car arrives and the driver loads her bag with a quiet efficiency that echoes the ground crew outside. As the city slides by, she calls into the airline training huddle. The supervisor, the manager, the attendant, and the compliance officer have joined from a small room near the concourse. She keeps her remarks short and useful. Read the policy when asked. Use the word review when you need to lower the room. Ask for a second set of eyes before you say no. She thanks them for fixing the error in view and for choosing a tone that protected the dignity of everyone involved. The compliance officer adds one practical point about stress drills on busy shifts. The attendant says she will volunteer to shadow new hires this month. The call ends without ceremony and with a shared understanding that ordinary habits will carry the change further than any single speech. At the office, she opens her laptop and sends a note to the airline product manager who pushed the interface change. She offers to review language for the help icon, not to control it, but to test whether a person rushing a line will understand it at a glance. The reply arrives within minutes with a thank you and a link to a short mock-up that uses 2 sentences and no jargon. She suggests one more phrase that gently warns against denial without verification. The manager accepts the edit and routes it to design. Her final act for the day is to set a reminder on her calendar for a short check in 2 weeks after the incident. The event title is plain: Follow up on gate correction. She writes a single sentence in the notes for that reminder. Ask what changed and what still gets confused. She knows that without the rhythm of following through, even good corrections fade into memory. She closes the laptop and lets the day change gears. Evening light lifts over the river and the office settles. She sits for a moment without a screen and considers the shape of the story people will carry away. Not a tale of punishment, not a victory lap, a sequence in which a rule was spoken aloud, a process held, a system updated, and a group of people chose to act with steadiness. That is enough. She stands, collects her things, and heads for the door with the quiet satisfaction of work done in clear lines. A week later, the change proves itself in a place where nobody is thinking about last Tuesday. A different airport, a different terminal, the same pressure that comes with boarding a full morning run. At gate C12, the scanner flashes the new label that product shipped after the incident. The red band no longer shouts stop. It reads reviews required in plain text with a small line beneath it that says, call a second set of eyes. The gate agent feels their breath rise for a fraction, then remembers the 3-step card clipped beside the screen. Verify the record, cite the clause, ask for help if unsure. The script is short enough to live in muscle. A traveler presents a first-class pass that looks correct. The agent sees a profile review prompt and almost falls into the old reflex. Instead, they touch the help icon. The window opens to a 2-sentence summary and a link to the clause the supervisor now has them practice out loud. The agent glances at the lead at the podium, Mind giving me a quick read? The lead steps in, confirms identity, payment, and seat. The agent reads the policy in a measured voice that the line can hear without turning it into a show. The traveler nods. Systems align. The light turns from red to steady white, then to green. The move takes less time than an apology would have taken and leaves no bruise behind. In an internal chat, the station supervisor posts a short note to the shift channel. Good catch at C12. The team used review language, read the clause, and cleared the traveler without delay. He pins a reminder to practice the wording during the afternoon lull, when lines are short and attention is long enough to build habit. No fanfare, just the work of keeping a lesson bright. Across town, the executive sits in a quiet conference room and finishes a memo for her own managers. She has copied 2 lines from the airline's help text into a section about interface clarity. The memo is not about airports. It is about how any frontline tool can mislead under noise. She asks her product teams to scan their own screens for colors that imply more certainty than they carry. She adds a paragraph drawn from the triangle she sketched in the air that morning. Dignity means the person in front of you should not have to carry your confusion. Clarity means rules and labels must say exactly what they do. Speed means the fix should arrive before frustration has time to harden. Her comms lead brings a draft of the public message they planned on the flight. It is 1 page, plain. It tells the story without names and uses the word process more than any other word. It thanks the airline for correcting in view and notes the small but important change to the scanner label. It does not invite a crowd to be angry. It invites leaders to audit their own points of friction and to publish their fixes as they ship. She approves it with 2 small edits that make the verbs a shade more active. Back at the airline, the compliance officer reviews early data from the new prompt. Denials tied to misread screens have dipped. Time to resolve policy questions is shorter. He notes a rise in the number of times agents use the phrase brief review for policy confirmation on the public address system. Passengers appear to accept it the way they accept weather updates. The officer writes a line that will please his own boss. The room learned to breathe because the rule learned to speak. The flight attendant who stood at the gate last week now shadows 2 new hires. She does not tell them the story in heat. She walks them through the moment when instinct can be replaced by checklists. Her voice is even as they practice reading the clause. She makes them do it with the background soundtrack on, with carts rolling and radios crackling, because stress blurs words. By the 3rd run, the cadence holds. A manager watches from the side and sees how repetition braids into confidence. Late in the day, the supervisor dials a short call with the executive, as promised. He reports that the quick fix is sticking and that the phrase review required has lowered more rooms than he expected. She listens and offers the same frame she carried from the plane. Keep policy audible. Keep labels honest. Keep the pause small and purposeful. He says the team is building a 1-minute training clip around that sentence. He thanks her again for insisting on correction without humiliation. They end the call before it turns into a ceremony. Night settles over the field and departures thin. At a quiet gate, an agent clips a laminated card to a screen that lists the 3 steps in clear lines. It looks ordinary, which is the point. The card will still be there after the thread has scrolled and the post has sunk beneath 100 new posts. A rule has found a home in plastic and habit. The next morning we'll test it again, as mornings do. And the next after that, change is measured not by applause, but by the number of times a door opens for the right reason with nobody watching. 2 weeks on, the story has settled into the bones of the places it touched. At the airline, a short video runs on break room screens between flights. The clip shows a gate podium, a scanner light, and a hand hovering over a help icon. A narrator reads the policy in a voice that could pass for an agent on a busy morning. The phrases are plain. Review required does not mean refusal. Read the clause. Ask for a second set of eyes. The video ends before it can turn preachy. It ends on the green light and the sound of a boarding door unlocking. An ordinary tone that now carries a lesson. In the product, the manager who pushed the label changed ships a second tweak after watching agents in the field. The help window now remembers the last clause opened, saving a few seconds at the moment it matters most. A designer tests the language with 3 agents who hate corporate jargon. They strip one sentence, keep two, and add a tiny line of guidance at the bottom. If unsure, narrate what you are doing. It calms the room. The compliance officer signs off and logs the revision inside the same case file that began with a denial and now records a sequence of small fixes that moved faster than a memo ever could. The supervisor hosts a short roundtable with leaders from neighboring stations. They meet in a glass room that looks over the concourse. He plays a recording of a gate agent giving a brief review for policy confirmation during a busy departure and shows the minute-by-minute effect on wait times and passenger tone. He is not selling a miracle. He is showing practice. Heads nod, not because anyone loves training, but because every person in the room has felt a crowd turn brittle when rules go silent. They schedule 3 pilot sessions for the following week and agree to share notes, not just numbers. Inside the executive's company, her memo on interface clarity turns into a workshop for product and support leads. She walks a team through the triangle she sketched on the plane, not as an abstract model, but as a path to salvage trust when friction finds a seam. Dignity starts with posture and words. Clarity starts with labels and scripts that hold under noise. Speed starts with a small pause that prevents a long mess. A manager from a different division presents a similar issue with a billing screen that confuses action with warning. The group pares the language down, chooses neutral colors, and proposes a 2-sentence help panel that links to policy. The fix is small enough to ship without a roadshow. The attendant who stood at the gate that morning now mentors a new hire through a mock line that uses recorded noise from rush hour. They practice reading the rule in a voice steady enough to reach the second person back without raising heat. They swap positions and run it again until the cadence holds. When they finish, the new hire says the rule felt easier to honor once it was said out loud. The attendant smiles at that and makes a note to keep the practice loop short and frequent so it becomes a reflex before fatigue sets in. A journalist reaches out to the executive for comment after a post about the scanner label circulates among operations nerds who collect small improvements the way others collect photos. She declines an interview that would turn the morning into a spectacle. She sends a 1-paragraph statement that centers the process and thanks the teams who corrected in view. The piece that runs is brief and practical. It carries no flames, only steps. The airline shares it internally as proof that the quiet way can travel farther than outrage. At a quarterly review, the airline compliance officer shows a chart with a simple slope. Fewer denials tied to misread screens, faster resolution when agents use the review script. The chart is not dramatic. It is a line you want across many rooms. He credits the labels, the practice, and the choice to let policy speak aloud at the moment of doubt. He ends with a sentence that has begun to echo in station meetings. The room breathes when the rule is audible. The executive returns to the city where the incident began for a separate trip. She passes the same terminal before dawn, stops for a coffee, and watches a gate team run their huddle at the podium. The supervisor prompts a quick read of the clause. The agent on duty does it without looking at the screen. Someone laughs softly at a line they have practiced until it no longer feels stiff. The laugh is not cynical. It is the sound of a tool fitting the hand. She walks to her gate and thinks about how change lasts when it can be measured in seconds saved and strain removed. She sends a short note to the supervisor, thanking him for keeping the habit alive after the thread died down. He replies with a photo of a small laminated card clipped to a scanner, the 3 steps printed in type so plain it almost disappears into the plastic. He writes a single line beneath the image. This is how we remember when the room gets loud. Her flight boards on time. At the door, a crew member greets her with the ease of someone whose morning has no shadows. She steps into the aisle and feels the ordinary comfort of the process working as designed. The scene that once swelled now lives inside a series of choices that other people made on other days. That is the mark she wanted to leave. Not a headline, a routine. As the cabin settles and the jet moves toward the runway, she closes her eyes and lets the hum fold around her. The work will continue in rooms she will never enter, carried by people who will never know her name, and that is the right shape for it to take. Months pass, and the story thins into thread, then into habit. In airports that the executive will never see, morning teams unlock podiums and check scanners that now speak in plain words. Review required sits under the red band like a calm hand on a shoulder. The 3-step card rides in its clip, edges softened by use. Verify the record. Cite the clause. Ask for a second set of eyes. Agents practice the lines with coffee still warm in paper cups, not because a memo told them to, but because the words make the first hour easier. When the room grows loud, someone reads the policy aloud, and the air cools by a measure you feel more than hear. The executive is back to ordinary travel, which is the highest form of praise a system can earn. She moves through security with a steady pace and no extra choreography. At a gate, in a city without history for her, a brief hesitation flickers on a screen. The agent taps the help icon, glances to a lead, and narrates the check in a voice pitched for the second person in line. Identity confirmed, payment verified, eligibility clear. The light steps from red to white to green. The traveler lifts a bag and smiles in relief that does not turn into drama because the moment was guided by language instead of guesswork. The executive watches without announcing herself and keeps walking. The fix has learned to travel alone. In her own company, the triangle she drew on a plane lives inside slide decks and short drills that product teams now run without asking permission. Dignity, clarity, speed is printed small in the corner of internal guides, not as a slogan, but as a compass. A support tool that once wrapped warnings in sharp colors now uses neutral tones and a helpline written in human words. A billing screen loses a sentence and becomes kind. A warehouse app stops blaming workers for scanner noise and adds a pause that saves more time than it takes. None of this wins applause. All of it steadies people who do difficult work while the world breathes down their necks. The airline compliance officer builds a tiny library of recorded gate moments where policy was read aloud and a crowd softened. He plays one at a regional summit and lets the room sit in the silence that follows the last sentence. It turns out that trust is built by the same tools that build safe departures. Clear labels, shared scripts, leaders willing to be heard doing the unglamorous thing at the exact minute it matters. After the session, a manager from a far station asks for the card template and the audio file. The officer emails both and writes a note that says to practice while the room is calm, because the words should fit the mouth before the pressure rises. On a winter night, the executive waits for a connection and walks the length of a quiet concourse to stretch her legs. She stops at a window and watches de-icing rigs move like patient insects under tall lamps. Her reflection sits faint in the glass. The morning that started all this feels near and far at once, like a scent you know but cannot place. She opens her notes and adds a single line for herself. Leave places a little less brittle than you found them. Close the app and keep moving. The lesson is not a performance, it is a practice. A message arrives from the supervisor she first spoke with near a different jet bridge. It contains one sentence and a photograph. The sentence says the phrase brief review for policy confirmation has become normal and passengers accept it the way they accept weather. The photo shows a simple scene that would be invisible if you did not know what to see. A scanner with a small label in plain text. A laminated card clipped beside it, edges scuffed, corners rounded by fingers that reach without thinking. The supervisor writes that the new hires ask fewer anxious questions now because the script catches them before the pressure does. She replies with thanks and a short promise to keep the same standard inside her own walls. Boarding begins for her flight. At the door, a crew member greets her with an ease that signals a good day. She steps into the cabin and feels the soft give of carpet, the ordinary hush that means the checklists did their work. In her row, she tucks the bag, fastens the belt, and lets her shoulders settle the last small distance that separates effort from rest. The captain speaks in the way good captains do, with facts and a calm tone that uses no flourishes. The plane pushes, turns, and takes the runway. The engines rise, and the lights of the field slide away. She closes her eyes and lets the climb smooth the edges of thought. The morning at the gate is no longer a story she needs to carry. It is a pattern other hands repeat, a set of words that keep rooms from breaking when they are most fragile. In the space between cloud layers, she lets the idea of credit drift to where it belongs, which is nowhere near her name. The measure sits in quiet moments like this, and in 1,000 small doors that open for the right reasons while nobody is filming. When the chime sounds and the crew begins their quiet work, she opens her eyes and writes one final line before the day moves on. Make the rule audible. Make the fix visible. Then step aside and let the routine hold.